Right now I will be discussing Chapter 13, Estate Tax Deduction from Gross Estate. So deductions are items allowed by law to be deducted to the gross estate in order to arrive at the net taxable estate. Only those allowed by law shall be claimed as deduction, and these items must be able to justify and should be proof that expense really exists. So there are two types of deductions: the ordinary deductions and special deductions. So under ordinary deductions are the transfer for public use amount received her under RA 4917, vanishing deductions, share of surviving spouse. And the special deductions are family home, medical expenses, and standard deduction. So what is funeral expenses? So they are actual funeral expenses, means costs incurred in connection with the interment or burial of the deceased with official receipt. And the amount allowed as deduction shall equal to the actual expenses incurred or the 5% of the gross estate, whichever is lower but in no case shall exceed in 200,000. For the funeral expenses, deduction examples are for case 1, gross estate 500,000, actual funeral expenses 70,000. For case 2, gross estate 2 million, actual funeral expenses 90,000. For case 3, 4,500,000, for the actual funeral expenses 185,000. For case 4, gross estate is 5 million. For the actual funeral expenses, it's 220,000. For funeral expenses, case 1, 5% of gross estate is 25,000. Actual is 70,000. Deductible is 25,000. For case 2, 5% of gross estate is 100,000. The actual is 90,000. Deductible is 90,000. For case 3, 5% of gross estate is 225,000. The actual is 185,000. The deductible is 185,000. For case 4, 250 is the 5% of gross estate. The actual is 220,000. The deductible is 200,000. So the funeral expenses shall consist of the following: the interment and or cremation fees, mourning apparel of the surviving spouse, expenses for the descendants' wake, fees and charges for the rites and ceremonies, expenses for the death notices published, telegrams, cables sent to relatives of the deceased, and cost of the burial lot, tombstone or monument, but not their upkeep. In case it is a family lot, the lot of the deceased shall only be deductible. So example of funeral expenses is Sheet Sharon's gross estate is 3 million. Her executor is claiming the following as funeral expenses related to death of Cheat: hospitalization incurred during the last 3 months prior to Cheat's death is 50,000. Burial lot of 20% are paid from friends and contribution is 50,000. Expenses for wake before burial 20,000. Thank you cards to the sympathizers is 2,000. Telegrams and cables sent to relatives is 1,000. Mourning apparel of the surviving spouse and children is 3,000. Mourning apparel of relatives is 1,000. Entertainment expenses during the rites and ceremonies during burial is 2,500. Now, how much is the allowable funeral expense? So here is Cheat's funeral expenses. The burial lot is 80% of 50,000 is 40,000. Expenses for wake before burial is 20,000. Telegrams and cables to relatives is 1,000. Mourning apparel of the surviving spouse and children is 3,000. Entertainment expenses during the rites and burial ceremonies is 2,000. You just have to add all of the funeral expenses and you will get the allowable funeral expenses of 66,500. So, what is judicial expenses? So, these are allowed deductions incurred for the administration, inventory, taking of assets, and settlement of estate. To be deductible, judicial expenses should be incurred during the settlement of the estate, but not beyond last day prescribed by law, or the extensions thereof for the filing of the estate tax return. So, under judicial expenses includes fees of executor or administrator, attorney's fee, court fees, accountant fees, appraiser's fees, clerk hire, cost of preserving and distributing the estate, cost of storing and maintaining property of the estate, and brokerage fees for selling property of the estate. So for judicial expenses, expenses not essential to the proper settlement of the estate but incurred for the individual benefit of hers, legatees, or DVCs are not allowed as deduction. Thus, the following are not allowed as deductions. Attorney fees, incident to litigation incurred by the heirs in asserting their respective rights or claims as to who are entitled to the estate left by the deceased. Premiums paid by a judicial administrator and his bond are not deductible because the ability of the appointee to give bond in the nature of a qualification, compensation of trustees such as expenses for being the account and benefit not of the estate but of the beneficiaries. So example of judicial expenses is malakas and maganda the disagreement in the sharing of inheritance of the estate of their parents. The disagreement prompted both parties to bring the matter to the court. Both of them incurred and paid attorney's fees incidents to litigation. A. Are the expenses borne by the opposing parties deductible from gross estate under judicial expenses? The answer is no. So, what is casualty losses? All losses incurred during the settlement of the estate arising from theft, robbery, embezzlement, fire, shipwreck, storms, and other calamities. Casualty losses can be claimed as long as the amount of loss is not compensated for by any insurance or extrajudicial settlement, and they have not been claimed as deduction from gross income for purposes of income tax computation. So, what is claims against insolvent person? So, this is a required requisite. So, what is claims against? So, here are the examples of claims against insolvent person. So, Bulalin borrowed 150 from Arturo. After a month, the debtor paid 50,000 before the remaining balance of 100,000 was paid. Arturo died. Prior to his death, the court declared Bulalin insolvent. The total assets and total liabilities of the debtor amount to 200,000 and 500,000 respectively. So how much bad debt is deductible from the case of Arturo? So the remaining balance of Bolalin is 100,000. So the recoverable amount is 2 divided 5 times 100k is 40,000. So deduct 100,000 and 40,000, so the amount deductible must be 60,000. So what are claims against the estate? So pertains to debts which are properly chargeable and enforceable against the estate. To be deductible, the following requisites must be complied. The liability represents a personal obligation of the deceased existing at the time of his death, except unpaid obligations incurred incident to his death, such as unpaid funeral expenses and unpaid medical expenses. That the liability was contracted in good faith and for an adequate or full consideration in money or money's worth. The claim must be a debt of or claim which is valid in law and enforceable in court. The indebtedness must not have been condoned by the creditor, or the action to collect from the descendants must not have prescribed. Examples of claims against the estate. So Doris borrowed 50,000 from her friend Sabel before indebtedness was paid. So Doris died. A. Is the funeral obligation deductible from the gross estate of Doris? B. How about if its deductibility would leave nothing to be distributed among the heirs? C. How about if Sabel decides to condone the debt? So the answer is A is yes, for B is yes, and for C is no. So what is unpaid mortgages? So these are unpaid indebtedness or loans secured by debtor's property, contracted in good faith and for an adequate and full consideration in money or money's worth. To be deductible, the property mortgage must be part of gross estate at FMV. So for the unpaid taxes, refer to taxes incurred prior to the date of the descendant's death and remain unpaid as of the date of death. So for the debt, so before it's deductible and after it will be non-deductible. So examples of vanishing deduction. So community property is 950,000. Exclusive properties is 650,000. Funeral expenses is 40,000. Judicial expenses is 25,000. Medical expenses is 15,000. Bequest to field government is 10,000. Claims against the estate is 15,000. So at the time of death of Pina, the parcel of land had an unpaid mortgage of 50,000, of which 20,000 was paid by Gina. So another illustration of vanishing deduction solution. So value in state of prior descendant is 350,000. Value in estate of present descendant is 475,000. So lower value is 350,000. The last mortgage is 20,000. So the initial BC is 330,000. Less deductions prorated for the funeral expenses is 40,000. For the judicial expenses is 25,000. The transfer of pub use is 10,000. Claims against estate is 15,000. Unpaid mortgage is 30,000. So total, add them all, it's 120,000. For number 3, deductible 330,000 divide 1,600,000 times 120,000 is equals to 24,750. So number 4, the base is 305,250 and rate for more than 3 to 4 years is 40%. So 40% of 305,250 is 122,100. So what is transfer for public use? So it is all bequests, legacies, divises, or transfers to or for the use of the Philippine government. Other than the Philippine government, it is not allowed as deduction. Must be through testamentary succession, deductible from exclusive portion of the estate, otherwise it is conjugal, so it must have written consent of the other spouse. Deemed to have been done by husband alone, otherwise there should be express stipulation that the wife joins the donation. If silent, it should be taken as an exclusive property. For the different rates of vanishing deduction, for 100%, it is only allowed within 1 year, 80% if it is 1 year to 2 years, 60% if it is 2 years to 3 years, 40% 3 years to 4 years, and 20% if it is 4 years to 5 years. To lessen the burden of paying tax due to the short period of property transfer by reason of early deaths, same property must be included in the gross estate to be deductible. Present descendant died within 5 years from the receipt of property through gratuitous transfer. The property involved is within the Philippines. Tax must have been actually been paid for such property. It must came from a prior decedent. No similar deduction must have been allowed to prior decedent. So illustration for vanishing deduction. Gina Dan died on October 21, 2013, leaving a parcel of land which she inherited from her mother, Pina G.A. Dan, who died May 2010. The value of the property at that time of their death mother was 350, but it appreciated to 475 in 2013. The gross estate deduction and other data consisted of the following. So, value to be taken, previous transfer versus present. Initial basis, value taken last mortgage paid. Proportionate deduction from IB equals ELIT plus TPU times IB divide GE. So, basis of vanishing deduction. Initial basis less is proportionate deduction and percentage of deduction level. So the amount received under RA 4917 is to refers to the amount received by heirs as a retirement benefit of the decedent to be that deductible has been in the service of for the same employer for at least 10 years, not less than 50 years of age, availed once only. So the share of surviving spouse must be communal or conjugal properties, not estate times 50% of it. For the special deductions, number 1 is family home, the dwelling house including the land, 2 where it is located, FMB of the family home, GE, FMV of the family home versus 1 million deductions, excess subject to estate tax, exclusive property taken up at 100%, conjugal property taken up at 50%. So example for special deductions for family home. Residential lot is 2,300,000. Residential house is 800,000. So how much is deductible? So for the residential lot, it costs 1,150,000. For the residential house, it is 800,000. So 1,150,000 plus 800,000 is equals to 1,950,000 family home, and the deductible is 1 million. So special deductions for medical expense is not exceeding 500,000 can be claimed. In excess of 500,000 can no longer be deducted. The expenses must have been incurred within 1 year to prior to death. So for the standard deduction under special deductions, amounts must be 1 million, no need of substantiation, any citizen or resident. Allocation of deductions. If the total amount exceeds the state statutory limit, the basis is total amount. If no, means to trace the deduction, the basis will be the total gross estate. So for the non-resident alien descendant, so it is allowed deduction. So ELIT, allowable deduction equals world ELIT times PGA divided TGA. Transfer for public use, vanishing deductions.